Hey guys, if you remember, the last thing we read about was about how a priori truths, according to Descartes, can underpin how we experience reality in three different ways. How we experience reality when dreaming, how we experience reality when being awake, and it's implied, though not directly mentioned, how we experience reality if we're insane or mad. Now we're going to see whether or not we can doubt those a priori truths. And to do that, we're not going to consider the power and the nature of God. And then we're going to think about whether or not it's possible for God to deceive us, even if God wouldn't deceive us. And that's really important because it kind of explains some tangents that he goes on to when developing his argument. So quickly write down these two success criteria, score yourself as soon as possible, and then I want you to draw a picture of the all-powerful or omnipotent God that we kind of explored when we were doing the Year 11 curriculum. Cheers. Okay, so right now we've arrived at a moment where Descartes thinks, hey, I've got some certainty. There's these a priori truths which underpin our experiences of reality and what we see, hear, feel, and everything in reality. But my objective is to doubt everything, absolutely everything, until I find the one thing that cannot be doubted. So if I can doubt it, then I'm going to doubt it. So then he asks the question, or we should be asking the question, how can we doubt the logic of maths? Now, by the way, I was hoping that somebody would pick up on this. In the last video, I deliberately put a mathematical falsehood down and said this is mathematics, and did that really to get you guys to think about that idea of mathematical necessity across all possible worlds. 2 plus 2 always equals 4, no matter where you are in different possible worlds. It's just the way the rules of mathematical logic operate, or arithmetic operate. So, obviously I was hoping when someone saw this, well, hang on, this isn't true. This can't work. Can it work when we're dreaming? Can it work when we're mad? We don't know. So I did this deliberately to get you to think about that kind of idea of necessity that exists within the idea of mathematical logic. But really, we're not here to assert that that is true. I never ever said that was true. It was just a little Easter egg I put in this video and the last video to get you to think about necessity and maybe say, hey, sir, this is wrong. Why'd you put it in there? And we could have that big discussion. The discussion point is why I put it there. So really, we're talking about proper maths. And, what about this idea? What about the idea that God might be playing tricks on us and convincing us that maybe mathematical logic or anything is real, okay? Even when it's not. So let's go through what he's saying. God is omnipotent, and because God is omnipotent, he could, if he wanted to, trick us and deceive us and make us think that 1 plus 1 equals 2, right? So let's, that's further developed here. Basically, he says God is all-powerful. That's part of the nature of God. He's omnipotent. So he can convince us that 1 plus 1 equals 2. But, usually when we think about the definition of God traditionally, God has always been omnibenevolent. So why would he go about tricking us? That's just ridiculous. So he realizes that there's a contradiction built into all of his philosophy, where he's going on by saying that God is the deceiver. He realizes that's kind of contrary to God's nature because it wouldn't prove that he's omnibenevolent. But it does open up the possibility for the fact that God could be deceiving us because he still is omnipotent. So take some notes. So he says, look, God is omnibenevolent, so he's probably not going to want to deceive us, but we still know that deception occurs with regards to the senses. In fact, we know that deception occurs, right? And deception can occur through sense data that we experience when we're in the waking world, when we're in a state of madness or insanity, or in a state of dreaming. So if we know that deception can occur here, then what's to say, well, it's not really impossible. It's actually quite possible that God could be creating some kind of deception or some kind of trick when we think about the actual a priori truths that underpin reality in all these senses, because we know that we can easily be deceived. We can be deceived about anything to do with reality. So why can't an all-powerful being deceive us about the a priori truths that we think they all have in common? All right, as a tangent, and it's not really an easy argument for me to accept, but he basically says, look, if we pursue the line of atheism here, then we just leave up everything open to falsehood. it can understand it's a logical continuation, but basically nothing could be certain, and I'll never find my certainty. My method won't work without the idea of God, so I'm just going to reject atheism outright because I want to find that certainty. Okay, so take some notes. All right, so let's start reading, shall we? And yet, firmly rooted in my mind is the long standing opinion that there is an omnipotent God who made me the kind of creature that I am. How do I know that he has not brought it about that there is no earth, no sky, no extending thing, no shape, no size, no place, while at the same time ensuring that all these things appear to me to exist just as they do now? What is more, just as I consider that others sometimes go astray in cases where they think they have the most perfect knowledge, how do I know that God has not brought it about that I too go wrong every time I add 2 and 3 or count the sides of a square, or in some even simpler matter, if that is imaginable? So that's where he's basically saying is God is the, really he's not saying, he's using mathematical a priori logic and saying that God is trying, maybe deceiving us and making us think that 1 + 1 = 2 when it might not. But you can also generalize that into other areas of logic or geometry, other a prioris that underpin the way reality may be constructed. So basically, what we need to conclude here is that this is the argument where God can be the deceiver about the a priori. Okay? Take some notes. But perhaps God would not have allowed me to be deceived in this way, since he is said to be supremely good. That's the argument, that he is omnibenevolent, so why would he deceive? But if it were inconsistent with his goodness to have created me such that I am deceived all the time, it would seem equally foreign to his goodness to allow me to be deceived even occasionally. Yet this assertion cannot be made. So he's saying, look, I am deceived, right? So maybe me being deceived isn't contrary to his nature, because it would seem inconsistent that he allows me to be deceived sometimes. You know, take a note. So we logically follow here that God allows us to be deceived, so maybe that's not contrary to his nature because we see deception happening. And this is where we get a bit deeper in the reading than we do in the summary, okay? Perhaps there may be some who prefer to deny the existence of so powerful God rather than believe that everything else is uncertain. Let us not argue with them, but grant them that everything said about God is a fiction. According to their supposition, then, I have arrived at my present state by fate or chance or a continuous chain of events, or by some other means. Yet since deception and error seem to be imperfections, the less powerful they make my original cause, the more likely it is that I am so imperfect as to be deceived all the time. I have no answer to these arguments, but I am finally compelled to admit that there is not one of my former beliefs about which any doubt may not properly be raised. And this is not a flippant or ill-considered conclusion, but is based on powerful and well thought out reasons. So in the future I must withhold my assent from these former beliefs just as carefully as I would from obvious falsehoods if I want to discover any certainty. That is basically his little tangential argument. He's basically saying, if everything is open to random cause and effect, fate, if there is no necessary God that put all this in place and that's steering the logic of the universe, then everything's going to be uncertain and a falsehood. I'm never going to find that one area of doubt. My whole exploration is just going to be completely ridiculously flawed. Here he's commenting on his method and how he works. All right? So take some notes. Okay. So did we question whether or not we can be certain of a priori truths? Yes, we did. We said that God allows some deception to occur, so it's not inconsistent with his omnibenevolent nature that he could be deceiving us. Therefore, God could be the deceiver convincing us of these a priori truths. So we've considered the nature of God's omnipotence, which gives him the power to deceive, even at the level of like a priori or logic. And then we thought about, well, if that's the case, then God can deceive us, and perhaps even a priori truths are not necessarily correct or true. Alrighty, I hope that all made sense, and thank you for listening.